We are just one day away from the kickoff of the NFL season, so we figured we'd bring you guys 10 players that you can trade for right before the season begins. A lot of these players, once the season begins, we think are going to go up in value. We think are going to be out to hot starts for the NFL year. So from a redraft perspective, from a dynasty perspective, we'll kind of bring you guys these players that we are going out and trading for. Of course, we broke down our my guys in yesterday's video. Those guys would also be great trade targets. These guys, a little bit more deeper names, a little bit down the board that we think are good options. So without further ado, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, we are about to enter week one. We've been waiting all offseason for this moment. But before we do that, we got to talk about some guys that we just want on our teams. We want to trade for. We're not going to spend too much time on this. We're trying to get this to about 20 minutes. So if you guys enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. But without further ado,
All right, so as I mentioned in the intro, this is going to be from kind of like a redraft perspective primarily, but you can also definitely take some things away from a dynasty perspective if you're a contender. Some of these guys are young players that can accumulate some value as well. Of course, all of our my guys are players that we are like, spending up for when it comes to redraft and dynasty trades. And also, if you're a rebuilder in dynasty, of course, go out and buy some 2024 first, especially after the week of college football that we just saw all those quarterbacks performing at a pretty high level, making the class a little bit better than we maybe initially anticipated. But let's start it off with some of our trade targets here. The first guy that I have is J.K. Dobbins. I went in depth on J.K. Dobbins in the breakouts video, so I'll keep this kind of brief. The reason I'm trading for him is because I think he has RB1 upside at RB2 price tags. When it comes to his redraft price tag, his dynasty price tag, you can get him for a relative discount for a guy that has question marks due to his health and due to the offensive situation, but more or less has the talent and the offensive installation to be able to hit RB1 upside. So for me, I'm buying J.K. Dobbins right now. If you guys are wondering what you should pay for J.K. Dobbins, any of like the dead zone running backs that you have, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, all of those type of guys, Miles Sanders, Alexander Madison, I would swap those guys one for one for J.K. Dobbins right now. And any like low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 types, Mike Evans, Michael Pittman, guys like that. If you need a running back for your redraft or your dynasty team, I would be 100% cool with parting with that. And a late first, early second round rookie pick is also what I'd be cool paying for him.
yeah, no, absolutely love J.K. Dobbins. We touched upon him basically all offseason, so let's keep it brief, and I'll go into my next player, my first overall player, and that's going to be Tyler Lockett, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. Talking about the redraft frame of mind, obviously opens up this opening week against the Los Angeles Rams defense, very weak defense. Seahawks should be big favorites in that game, and for what it's worth, I do think he can get off to a very fast start. We obviously expect a lot from the Seahawks offense. Running backs have been kind of dealing with injuries throughout the preseason, and speaking of injuries, JSN is just coming off of major wrist surgery this preseason. So I do expect, especially in week one, Gino's going to lean on his vets. Gino's going to lean on DK Metcalf. Gino's going to lean on Tyler Lockett. And I do think, given the player archetype that Tyler Lockett is, being able to dominate on all three levels of the field, that he's got an opportunity to be a wide receiver 1 right off the bat. And I think this is a guy that you may be able to flip for wide receiver 15 price tags after this week. So in terms of redraft, absolutely love him. In terms of dynasty, he's also one of my top targets when I'm a contending team. If you can get him for maybe like a second round pick, you're a top contender. You can get him as, your first flex, second flex, really dominate that position, especially in a full PPR. I think Tyler Lockett can give you a major advantage this season.
Yeah, Lockett's a good option. I talked about him in the like market reactivity thing, and you kind of just touched on why he could get off to a hot start because, he's been a big name fantasy player before. If he gets out to a hot start, a lot of people are just going to assume, oh, it's business as usual for Tyler Lockett. And, long term towards the course of the season, we expect him to maybe start off as like a wide receiver 2 type, maybe close out the season more as like a wide receiver 3 flex option. But from a redraft perspective, you can just flip him after a couple weeks and, upgrade to maybe DJ Moore's out to a slow start, or maybe Christian Watson's out to a slow start or something like that. But as far as like what you should pay for him right now, if you guys are in a redraft league and you're like, I don't know what to pay for Tyler Lockett, I would sell, DeAndre Hopkins for him. I would sell some of the injured receivers, Terry McLaurin, Jerry Jeudy, those type of guys as well. I could sell some of those dead zone running backs for him as well. All the guys that I mentioned for J.K. Dobbins would apply also for Tyler Lockett, especially if you're talking about a flex option here. I think Tyler Lockett makes quite a bit of sense there. Moving on to my second guy here, second two guys actually, because they play for the same team, Diontae Johnson and Pat Freiermuth. I've talked pretty heavily that I believe this Steelers offense will run through these two guys. Diontae Johnson as the elite, separator, target earner that he is. And then Pat Freiermuth, I mean, third-year tight end. Not a lot of first and second-year tight ends have done what Freiermuth has done so far. So his is more of like a dynasty reason to buy into him, but also I like him as a low-end tight end one in redraft. If you guys missed the boat on a number of the top tight ends and you want to go out and purchase somebody in your redraft league that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, you're not going to have to pay, a high-end piece for a guy like Pat Freiermuth. You could probably sell, Elijah Moore for him. You could probably sell Rashad Bateman. You could probably sell Quentin Johnston or Brandon Cooks or something like that, somebody in that vicinity, if not worse. You could probably even get away with like a Nico Collins or a Cortland Sutton selling off for a guy like Pat Freiermuth in a trade in a redraft league. But Diontae and Freiermuth, I just think this Steelers offense is going to elevate. They're going to run the offense through these guys, and especially in PPR leagues, these guys are great options.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love those shouts. Diontae Johnson, Pat Freiermuth have already shown that throughout their careers that they can demand targets. And if Kenny Pickett does take the step up, because although he showed signs at the end of last year, he still only threw 7 touchdowns. He still threw 9 interceptions. So although we saw the progression, it didn't really materialize into the statistics quite yet. And we've seen all preseason. I get it for the most part. They've been playing against backups, but the offense has looked efficient. Kenny Pickett's been in rhythm. And if he can take that step up in a competitive division in the AFC North, we could be in store for the Steelers offense, not having to rely upon that, ground and pound nausea attack, not having to rely upon their defense being able to shut everyone down. Because quite frankly, given the offense in that division, you're not going to be able to hold Joe Burrow to 20 points. You're not going to be able to hold Lamar Jackson to 20 points. You're not going to be able to hold, if Deshaun Watson gets back to the level of play we think he will, hold that Browns team to 20 points. You're going to need to put up points. And I do think that this Kenny Pickett-led offense with Diontae and with Pat Freiermuth have the opportunity to be one of the top 12 or so offenses in the league, which is a big step up from what we saw last year. So love those options. I'm going to head over to the NFC. I'm going to head over to a rookie wide receiver and quarterback duo. I may as well just put them together. And for the most part with the quarterback position, just for the record in this video, that more so applies to the super flex settings, because we're going to be talking about more quarterback 2, quarterback 3 range guys. If you're in a 1 quarterback redraft league, like a lot of these guys aren't going to be rostered, but in Superflex, they have to be kept an eye on. So Bryce Young and Jonathan Mingo, the rookie quarterback and wide receiver duo from Carolina. The reason why I'm all over on Jonathan Mingo's price in redraft specifically right now is how much I just believe in that quarterback. I think Bryce Young has the opportunity to be viewed as a consensus top 12 to 15 quarterback after the season. I get it. People are going to bring up, well, rookie quarterback sans, Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott in the past haven't really shown they can have consistent rookie years. I would bet on Bryce Young being the outlier. Just the way he plays the position, the way he's able to create out of structure, I do think that he can push for fringe top 15 level quarterback status in fantasy as a rookie with the efficiency I could expect. And that's kind of why I'm all in on Jonathan Mingo right now in redraft. He's getting the starting snaps, and it's more so a vouch for Bryce Young's talent than it is Mingo himself. I do understand that he's a raw prospect. He may have some learning curve earlier on, but I do think that if he's getting starting snaps and Bryce Young is the quarterback, that's someone I want to hitch my wagon to, especially in redraft. In Dynasty, a little bit more worried about Mingo long-term given the cost that he's at. But with Bryce Young, if you can get him for quarterback 12, quarterback 13 prices in your Dynasty League right now, I will be smashing the buy button any chance I get.
Yeah, I talked about Mingo in the Sleepers video because he just simply, I mean, like you said, he's a raw prospect. We didn't really love him as a Dynasty asset because of the production or lack thereof at Ole Miss. But knowing that he's in a receiver core with nobody to throw to, and knowing that he has very high investment into him, a top 40 NFL draft pick, he was the 5th wide receiver right after those top first rounders that went off the board in the NFL draft. So yeah, buying into Mingo and redraft specifically, where he's a lot cheaper than he is in Dynasty, definitely makes a lot of sense, especially if you guys have 3 or 4 wide receivers in your 2 wide receiver and flex spot, and you're in need of some upside. Maybe you grab like a Lockett or a Mike Evans or something for your flex, and you want some young upside breakout potential. I think Jonathan Mingo fits the bill in your redraft formats as well.
Yeah, and real quick too, I will say, and if you're in a redraft superflex league, you may be able to down tier from like a mid-range quarterback to Bryce Young and get some on top. Maybe somebody has Mingo and Bryce Young, and you can get Bryce Young and Jonathan Mingo for, let's just say, like Jared Goff or Russell Wilson plus your last round pick. Let's just say insert random handcuff Chuba Hubbard here. I'm all for that type of down tier in redraft specifically as well.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. So a guy a little bit further up the board that I think is a good option to buy, I would say especially in Dynasty, because he has a chance to really accumulate a lot of value. But also, I really like this guy in redraft. I've literally drafted him in both of my redraft leagues so far, my home league and our listener league. DJ Moore, he was going, in the 4th, 5th round of most redraft leagues. The reason I think he has, a case to be a value accumulation potential guy in Dynasty, as well as a highly productive guy from a redraft perspective, is the fact that Justin Fields, I'm starting to buy into the fact that he could take a big step forward. It wouldn't really shock any of us, or at least it shouldn't, that, a highly decorated prospect, a guy who was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, 3-year college player, 2 years where he was playing at a big program, high leverage games, played at a high level, top 10 NFL draft pick, goes into the NFL, has a monster breakout second year from a fantasy perspective, not so much as a passer from a real life perspective, but it shouldn't shock us if he takes a big step forward the way that we've seen quarterbacks of the past, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, these type of guys do. And everybody, anytime you bring up those quarterbacks, people are like, oh, it's blasphemous. You can't say that he's going to be the next Josh Allen or the next Jalen Hurts. It's like, in the moment, though, we didn't think Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts were going to be the next Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, though. So with Justin Fields, he was actually a more highly decorated prospect than both of those guys. And he's shown to this point in his career that he can lead an NFL offense. And the fact that the Bears have invested in what his strengths are, and they got him a number 1 receiver in DJ Moore, who's specifically the guy that I'm going after. I would rather have DJ Moore than Keenan Allen. I would rather have DJ Moore than, Terry McLaurin and, DeAndre Hopkins and some of the guys that I already mentioned in the wide receiver range. Again, if he's a flex option for you, sell those dead zone running backs for DJ Moore. And when it comes to a dynasty perspective, he's available probably for like a late first. If you're a contender, you could probably just sell your first right away for DJ Moore, and he could legitimately give you top 15 production, because this guy has been a wide receiver 2 pretty much his entire career with no quarterback play whatsoever. If Justin Fields is at least an average passer or better, he's going to have clearly the best quarterback play of his entire career.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched upon that point with Justin Fields. I mean, he was always more a traits rather than, instant production guy coming out of college. Everybody kind of said that on his profile when he was leaving Ohio State. And for what it's worth, I mean, he was incredibly productive at Ohio State, leading them, of course, to the national championship game when he was in college. So when it comes to Justin Fields, if you're to just talk about the traits of the quarterback, the arm talent, the play on the run, obviously, of course, what he's able to do when he actually tucks it and runs, he is one of the most talented quarterbacks, I think, in the league, if he can unlock that mental aspect. And I do think entering into this year with all the experience now that he has under his belt, that he can take that step up like a Jalen Hurts, like a Lamar Jackson did, like a Josh Allen did. And if that's the case, if he can give you near MVP level play, if he does take that step up, not only is DJ Moore as a wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 2 for that matter, like a fringe top 25 guy in redraft leagues right now, already a good buy, he's got legitimate top 5 wide receiver upside if Fields does take that step.
Yeah, absolutely. So we already kind of touched on the Steelers, so you could probably keep this one brief. We don't believe in Najee Harris, but we do believe in Jaylen Warren. In redraft and in Dynasty, we both think he's a very good option to go buy on the cheap for some running back depth.
Yeah, absolutely. So I touched upon him in both my bust video when I talked about Najee and my sleepers video when I talked about Jaylen Warren himself, but he's just a much more efficient back in that Steelers backfield right now. And before you guys go to the comment section and say, well, Najee's still the starter, he's going to get the majority of the reps, I'm not arguing right now that Najee won't have 55, 60, maybe even upwards of 62, 63% of the opportunity share of the backfield. But what I'm saying is that Jaylen Warren could do more on 40% of the backfield than Najee Harris can do on 60%. And yet Jaylen Warren is a fraction of the price. Not to mention the Steelers' usage in this preseason hasn't even indicated a 60, 65% opportunity share. It's indicated about a 55 to 45 split between Najee and between Jaylen Warren in terms of the 28 snaps that Kenny Pickett in the first team offense played this preseason. Najee Harris was in on 16 of them. Jaylen Warren was in on 12 of them. Also worth noting that Jaylen Warren got all of the third down work in that sample as well. If Jaylen Warren, come week 4, come week 5, can turn this into a 45 split committee where he gets all of the third down work, all the receiving production on this team, he has legitimate RB2 level upside in terms of standalone value. I think he could be a top 25 level back, maybe, the Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon type of complex we've seen before. We get the one efficient back, you get the grinder between the tackles. I think Jaylen Warren can be that type of role. And yet his current cost in redraft is 11th round pick, 10th round pick if you're in a very sharp room. Like, you can get him very, very cheap. And he's a guy that standalone value I already think is a good bet, but the implied value is massive here. We already touched upon how good we think the Steelers offense can be. If Najee Harris were to miss any time and Jaylen Warren can be thrust into the RB1 role, I hate to make this comparison because I'm a Cowboys fan, but man, I can see a Tony Pollard level ascension given the efficiency marks we saw from Jaylen Warren last year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked too if you could get Jaylen Warren for virtually nothing from a dynasty perspective. You could probably use him as a throw-in. Like, let's say you were going to buy DJ Moore, who I just talked about, and you wanted to give up your late first and your late third. You could probably get both DJ Moore and Jaylen Warren for that price tag. So yeah, I think he's a great buy from a dynasty perspective as well, especially if you're a little weaker at running back, which I'm assuming if you guys have been following our content, you probably are, because that's how we build our dynasty teams as well. My number 4 guy here is Gabe Davis, a guy that virtually has the exact same projection this year as he did last year. Only this year he's way cheaper. So I like him a lot more. Like, he literally has the exact same projection, exact same upside, exact same week winning, 90 plus yard touchdown upside that he had last year. Only now, from a redraft perspective, he was going like the 8th, 9th round instead of the 5th, 6th round, potentially 4th round if you look on a site like Underdog last year. And from a dynasty perspective, you can probably get this guy for like a late 2nd rounder versus like maybe a late 1st, early 2nd where he was going last year in dynasty. So Gabe Davis is the perfect, like, if you guys play in a deep starting roster in a redraft league, it's like a 2 wide receiver, 3 flex league. Gabe Davis is the absolute perfect guy to have fill out your like last flex, because he has the week winning upside that you're looking for. Bottom line is, with Gabe Davis, he's the exact same projection as he was last year, only now he's way cheaper.
Yeah, 100%. And for what it's worth, like, they were always going to add a weapon in the pass game this offseason. Obviously, Dalton Kincaid, it's much better than them landing JSN. It's much better than them landing Jordan Addison to this team. Like, for what it's worth, obviously, we're very high on Dalton Kincaid. We think he could be a very good player, but like, he's not going to command a 25% target share on this team. Gabe Davis still has that role intact, still is that deep threat for Josh Allen, who probably has, barring maybe Patrick Mahomes, the strongest arm in the entire NFL. I do think that Gabe Davis entering this year is a sneaky post type sleeper. I talked about him in our My Guys episode just yesterday, that I think he can threat for 45 touchdowns, and you're getting the deep threat of a quarterback with that level of passing touchdown outlook, all for Gabe Davis at his current depressed cost. So we'll head over to my number 4 trade target, and that's going to be Antonio Gibson, running back of the Washington Commanders. And we've basically talked about the pros of this Washington offense ad nauseum all preseason, along with the Steelers, but I do think this could be a much improved Washington team. And with Antonio Gibson in week 1 specifically, playing against that Arizona Cardinals front, should have a very good game in that regard. I think he can command, 2-3 touchdowns in that game if the script goes according to plan. And even if you want to hold him, you can hold him. And I do think he has a great outlook throughout the year. But if you want to sell him after that game, I think you could potentially threaten top 15 overall prices at the running back position. Maybe J.K. Dobbins, who you mentioned before, gets off to a slow start in week 1 and you want to trade for him. Maybe a guy like Javonte Williams, Bryce Hall get off to a slow start and you can work up and tier up to those guys. I think Antonio Gibson is the perfect player, especially for early season production, that you can get at a cheap cost right now. If you've already had your drafts, they're probably going in the 9th, 10th round area of your leagues, and you may be able to get them for cheap. Maybe a handcuff plus an upside stash on your bench. Maybe, you want to down tier from a vet wide receiver like Mike Evans and get Antonio Gibson plus. You have the opportunity with Antonio Gibson to get RB2 level production at the beginning of the season and potentially have tradability into a better running back later on. And in terms of Antonio Gibson, in terms of his dynasty cost right now, you should be able to get him for maybe an early to mid 2nd at the highest point. If not, maybe you're able to package, a worse running back plus a 3 to get Antonio Gibson. That's a very palpable cost, in my opinion. And in terms of redraft, like I said, you want to down tier from a vet wide receiver, or if you want to work up, let's say you got Adam Thielen or something like that in the 12th round and somebody needs wide receiver bad, and you can add Adam Thielen plus Chuba Hubbard to go up and get a guy like Antonio Gibson. The cost is very stomachable right now for a guy that I think, like I said, can give you top 20 level production, especially in the early portion.
Yeah, the key for him is that McKissick is gone, right? Like, he has the chance to carve out the full pass catching role. I think this backfield will honestly be like a dead even split, which kind of sucks because we want Antonio Gibson to be like the main back here. But Brian Robinson's probably going to be a thorn in his side. He's probably going to carry the ball. But you do also have the contingent upside that if anything happens to Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson is more than capable of carrying the full workload. We've seen him do it for a number of years there in Washington. The important part is that he now has the full autonomy of the pass catching role, 60-70% of the team's routes at the running back position. And I do think, as we've talked about with Bieniemy, he's probably going to want to stretch this thing horizontal. His best athletes are the top 3 receivers and Antonio Gibson. And speaking of the Commanders and Antonio Gibson, we can kind of just transition right into their quarterback, because especially like as we talked about with Bryce Young, especially in super flex formats, especially in dynasty formats, or leagues where you're just like punting the quarterback position, whatever the case is, I think Sam Howell's a really good option. I think he's a guy that can get you by. Again, we had a 1,000-yard rushing season from this guy in college, and he now has an offense with a ton of playmakers. Eric Bieniemy's calling an up-tempo script. And also, I mean, he's looked quite good in the times that we've seen him on the field in the preseason as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with Sam Howell, like you mentioned, we expect this offense to be a lot better than people anticipate. I think they can threaten to be one of the top 15 or so offenses in the NFL. I think Sam Howell, I mean, we both liked him in the pre-draft cycle. This is a guy that can also contribute with his legs, obviously has an active arm. And I saw him live against my Dallas Cowboys in week 18 of last year, and he didn't look like a rookie quarterback. I was so shocked watching how he performed, watching how poised he was in that game. I talked about it when I was going into the case for Jahan Dotson in my breakouts video, but I mean, Ron Rivera basically admitted to everybody that, I fucked up. I should have started Sam Howell earlier. And if I moved off of Taylor Heineke or Carson Wentz earlier in the season, we probably would have had a chance to make the playoffs if Sam Howell was our starter. Because if you guys remember, Washington was in the thick of it till the end of the season. And randomly, once they got eliminated, just decided to throw out their best quarterback. So I do think with the full offseason, with the enemy coming in, potentially taking that ascending step going into his second year, that Sam Howell, after the end of this year, can be viewed as a consensus top 15 to 20 quarterback, kind of like how we view Ryan Tannehill right now. I think personally that Sam Howell can enter that type of frame.
Yeah, standard one quarterback redraft league. You probably don't want Sam Howell on your roster, but for those of you guys who play in super flex leagues, for those of you guys who play in dynasty super flex leagues, Sam Howell is a guy that we want to trade for before people realize, what they missed out on. And Brock Purdy's the same thing. He's the last guy of this video. Brock Purdy, I get it. He's not the most high ceiling quarterback in the world, but the career ascension that I think we're going to see for Brock Purdy is basically what we saw out of Jared Goff early on in his career, where he was like a system quarterback. Nobody really believed that he was, the best quarterback in the league, but he played at a top 5 to 10 level statistically because of what Sean McVay's system did for him.
Super Bowl.
And I think he made the Super Bowl. I think exactly the same situation could happen for Brock Purdy here. And from a superflex standpoint and redraft, from a dynasty perspective, dynasty superflex perspective, I want investment into these two quarterbacks because I think their outlooks are very, very inexpensive right now. You don't have to pay a high number of price tag from a dynasty perspective or from a superflex redraft perspective. And you could get a legitimate quarterback to potentially top 15 quarterback. Brock Purdy in games that he started last year literally was quarterback 1 in points per game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because if you guys are, curious, why should I be buying Brock Purdy? It was a 7th round pick, flash in the pan, whatever, this and that. And I get that. It was a little bit volatile going into the year. But if you were to rank the offenses, quarterback aside, of every team in the NFL, and you don't put the San Francisco 49ers at least 1 or 2 with the Philadelphia Eagles, you're doing it wrong. The offensive line is there. You got one of the best tight ends in the league. You got one of the best wide receiver cores in the league. On top of that, you have the most versatile running back in the entire league, especially one that can command 105, 110 plus targets if he stays healthy. We're not asking Brock Purdy to be the chef here. He just needs to be the baker. He just needs to follow the blueprint. Don't mess up. Don't put too much flour in. Don't let it rise. Just handle your business. And we know that if Brock Purdy can handle his business, the weapons will carry him. And we saw it last year, like you said, was a quarterback 1 in points per game when he took over.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we talked about it all in this video. We talked about some guys that are good redraft guys, talked about some guys that are good dynasty guys. This video was kind of for anybody who was watching this. If you guys wanted to take away something from it, you probably got something. Essentially, these are just guys that we want to trade for before week 1 starts, before their price starts to go up, because we think they're going to perform better than their current price tags in redraft, in dynasty, from a production standpoint, from a value accumulation standpoint in dynasty. Doesn't really matter. So if you guys enjoyed, if you got some value from this video, leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Make sure you're tuned in for all of the content that we're going to have going throughout the season. Really got some cool stuff planned, so definitely check all that stuff out. And of course, with the season starting, if you want to get some action on the game, head on over to Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code FSE for 100% back up to $100. When you sign up with a minimum of $10 deposit, now that drafts are over, you can still get our redraft guide if you haven't drafted yet for whatever reason. But I will imagine most of you guys are going to need help with your start-sit decisions throughout the year, and our weekly rankings will have you covered with that, along with all of our weekly matchup charts and all that good stuff to help you decide, do I start Tyler Lockett this week or do I start Antonio Gibson this week? That type of stuff will have you covered in the weekly rankings manifesto, and you can get that for free by signing up on Underdog Fantasy with just $10. So if that interests you, check that out. Link down below in the pinned comment. You can also get it on Flock Fantasy as well. Link down below there as well. Promo code FSE for 30% off on flockfantasy.com. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.